and very good morning to all of you, and a Happy New Year. I'm Pastor Siket, and I'm probably familiar to some of you, maybe not many, because my wife and I, we've been away for 14 years in Toronto, ministering to international students as missionaries there. And now we're back in Singapore, based here in Singapore, in serving in missions, the missions agency, not the university. Yeah? No. So SIM stands for Serving in Missions. And I'm the regional director for International Students Ministry, overseeing some 15 countries or so. So there will be a lot of traveling, so I may still not be around much in Kamo. But I'm so glad to be here in my home church and given this privilege to preach on the new year, a new message, so to speak. And we've read the passage from Acts 17. I'm going to talk about spending time in something new. This is the new year, and we should be talking about new things. Spending time in something new. This is a new year, the year of the cat. And before you throw your rotten pineapple tarts at me, it is the year of the cat in Vietnam. They call it Tet in Vietnam. My wife and I, when it's Lunar New Year, we don't call it Chinese New Year because the Vietnamese celebrate it too. The Koreans celebrate it, they call it So Lao. And we will go greet them, a very long one. Say hey, Pak Manibok, Paduseo. And we also celebrate with the Chinese, the mainland Chinese call it Chun Jie. So we don't say 新年快乐, you say 春节快乐. So it is an East Asian celebration. Today is the first day of the Chinese New Year. And for those of us who already have broken our New Year resolutions, how many of us? Here's a new opportunity to resolve new resolutions. And I hope to challenge you today to make a meaningful one in the message. I will deal with this passage here in 4 points. It's all about new things, right? A new city, a new situation, a new paradigm, and a new challenge. A new city. Some of us have visited this city, so it's not new to us. But for Paul, this is a new city. Paul is on a missionary journey with Silas, his partner, second missionary journey. And he's already been to places like Philippi, which is, we are told, a leading city of Macedonia in Acts 16, verse 12. And then he's been in Thessalonica, Acts 17:1, and Berea, 17:10. So now he's in a new city, Athens, Acts 17, verse 16. And Athens, if you know your history and you know your geography, it's in Greece, and this is the intellectual and cultural capital of the Roman Empire and the religious capital of Greece, even at this time. It's lost much of its glory by now. It was at its height before, with people like Socrates and Plato, Aristotle, and all the people that we read about in the stories. So a new situation. Before, it was his custom to minister in the synagogues in each place that he would visit. And in Acts 17, verses 1 to 2 and 10, we are told that's what he did. Or in Acts 16, verse 13, in the city of Lystra, for example, in Lystra and Derbe, he will go to the places where the Jews gathered. And in Philippi, he went to the riverside. There wasn't enough men, I suppose, for a synagogue there, so they were worshiping by the river, and that's where he converted this rich businesswoman called Lydia. Now, in the synagogues, as in Athens now, he goes and preaches in the synagogue, and he finds devout Jews, and he finds devout Greeks, and God-fearing Greeks. Verses 4, 12, and 17 tells us that, and that's where you find godly people, religious people in the synagogues. And they would be very familiar with the Bible of that time. That's the Old Testament. Now, in Athens, he still started with the synagogue on the Sabbath day. Verse 17 tells us that. But here he faced a new situation. Because in Athens, he found a lot of people who did not know our Jehovah God. In verse 22, he says, "You are a very religious city." But in verse 16, we are told he found this city full of idols. Now, the Greek word translated religious here can also mean superstitious. So Paul, I think, was very deliberately ambiguous. He says, you guys are a religious people, but the word in Greek can also mean you guys are a very superstitious people. And we are told in verse 16, actually, the NIV uses the word, he was greatly distressed when he saw the idols. The Greek word is paroxino, which gives us the English word paroxysm, spasm. You know, those of you who are doctors, you know, paroxysm is an uncontrollable passion and spasm. And Paul was so stressed, looking at the city full of idols and saying, what can I do with this idolatrous city? So he was greatly distressed. He was provoked from within him. And I think we all should be, as we see the billions of people, the millions and billions of people still lost without their Savior, Jesus Christ. So it's a new situation, because this also is a very different city. It's a city full of philosophers and intellectuals. We're told in verse 18, the Stoics, the Epicureans, and lots of other philosophers, they were full of very bright and very smart people. And if you know your Greek history, as I assume some of you would, you know that they would meet in, the usual places, the equivalent of the universities, but also in the marketplace, the agora. And this was a city not only where they could meet in the marketplace, the agora, they also met in a place called the Areopagus, which translates into Mars Hill in English. And Mars Hill is still there. The ruins are there if you go to Athens. And this was where people debated on intellectual things. So this is the academy, the place where they debated religion, for example. So the Areopagus was where Paul went to preach the gospel. Now we are told here in this passage, Luke is a very, sharp observer of people, and he's writing this narrative. And he tells us that the people of Athens spent their time in nothing but telling or hearing something new, verse 21. So they're all always in this intellectual ferment, just very, very thinking people, very curious people, always looking for the latest ideas and the latest trends. And they were, of course, unlike the Jews in Thessalonica that Paul had just visited in verse 5. In verse 13, we're told that these people had closed minds. Why? Because in verse 5, they were jealous of Paul, and they sought him to assault him. They were attacking him and his followers, and they roused up mobs to stop Paul's preaching in Thessalonica. verses 5 to 13. And they followed him to Athens, and they were trying to rouse up the mobs. This effort to just stop him from preaching. Now, it is good to always be open to new ideas, new innovations, and new technologies. And today we're talking about AI, artificial intelligence. We're talking about Industry 4.0, blockchain, and lots of innovations. The world is going to be so different from the world we've come from. And even the world that I grew up as a child is gone. We have things like fax machines and typewriters, and you ask the kids today what they are, and they go, huh? Is that a new game? Is that a new software? A Telegram? That's a software, right? New technologies change the way we live. And this is how society progresses. New situations often force us to do new things, to innovate. And so we see Paul doing that here in Acts 17. He is innovating